Europe was undergoing a time of immense change in the 1800s. Change is sometimes good and sometimes bad. Have you ever had a teacher who suddenly changed things on you? Answer this question on Kia.com before watching the rest of this video. Now that you've thought about a time a teacher has tried to change things on you, we are going to talk about Europe in the 1800s and try to understand how people felt about the changes that were happening to them. There are two basic sides in the debate about changes. There are the conservatives who are happy just to keep things the way they are. That's why they're smiling. And liberals who are mad because they aren't happy with the way things are. They want to change things. Conservatives supported the monarchs and the kings and focused on maintaining the old ways or the old order, while liberals supported the middle class or the bourgeoisie and wanted to go with new ways and a new order of things. The conservatives teamed up with the king and with nobles and agreed to work together at a meeting called the Concert of Europe. This was not a place where they got together and played a bunch of French horns. Rather, this was a place where nobles decided to skip over the middle class and appeal directly to the peasants to try and get them on their side of the fight. Many peasants, surprisingly, wanted to keep the old ways of tradition, even though they had to do most of the work. Conservatives were also happy to keep things the way they are because they had made loads and loads and loads of money keeping things exactly the way they are. They wanted to keep the king on the throne because he gave them good jobs and kept them from having to pay taxes. And just like the soul scene of Aretha Franklin, all the nobles wanted was a little respect from the peasants and the middle class. Conservatives also wanted to keep all the churches the same. There had been three major churches in the past. There had been the Eastern Orthodox Church in Eastern Europe, there had been the Catholics in Austria and South Europe, and there had also been the Protestants in Northern Europe. Liberals, on the other hand, wanted people to have natural rights such as life and liberty, and they wanted these rights to be guaranteed through a constitution. Conservatives were worried, however, that these new ideas would make them lose all of their money, so conservatives called for slow change while liberals called for fast change. One famous German conservative was Metternich. He opposed the free press, which means he didn't want the newspapers to be able to write whatever they wanted. He wanted to crush any type of protest, and he wanted to crush those sad protesters with a strong central army. Liberals, on the other hand, were business owners, bankers, lawyers, politicians, newspaper editors, writers, and they had many other jobs that made up the middle class. They opposed kings, they opposed privileges, they opposed established churches, but they were in favor of liberty, free markets, natural rights, and free elections. In other words, liberals valued a republic where people shared power over a dictatorship or monarch where just one person ruled. But if liberals couldn't get rid of the monarch, they at least wanted to limit his power by forcing him to sign a constitution. Liberals at the time believed that the only job of government should be to protect our rights as individuals. However, liberals in the 1800s still were not perfect. They believed strongly that those with land should be able to vote and those without land should not be able to vote. It wasn't until later in the century that all men were seen as created equal and universal manhood suffrage was introduced. That's right, you are allowed to go to Universal Studios and suffer in long lines all day. But really, universal manhood suffrage meant that all men should be allowed to vote no matter where they come from or how much money they have or don't have. The final change that was taking place in Europe was the idea of nationalism. To understand nationalism, you have to know that most countries up to this time were built by powerful people, and no one really had a say in where the borders were. So you might have a situation like this one where most of the people in a country are one race, but people from another race might also live in that country. Perhaps those few people who are of a different race want to recreate the borders so that they are in the same country as their cousins, aunts, uncles, and so on. But as of right now, there is a border blocking them from doing so between the two countries. Nationalists from this time period argue that we should get rid of borders and redraw the lines so that people of the same heritage could be together. Nationalism was good in the sense that it encouraged a common heritage and a sense of identity amongst its people, but nationalism would also give rise to intolerance and hatred and sometimes even persecution of minority groups. So, just to review, there was lots of change in Europe in the 1800s. Conservatives were worried about losing their money and about keeping the king on the throne. Liberals wanted to make sure that people had their natural rights and that constitutions were created as an agreement between the people and their governments. Conservatives wanted slow change while liberals wanted fast change. Nationalism was also changing the way people thought about boundaries and making people want to redraw the lines of Europe. If you had to sum up the period of Europe in the 1800s, it would probably be change, 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 and even more change, even if the nobles didn't like it.